We were looking at Sartre's novel Nausea in the last episode, and particularly some of his experience, the main character's experiences, which seemed like almost like a psychotic sense of an unreality, or sense of unreality of the world. And from that came these philosophical conjectures, I guess, that he formed. And also there were some references that related to other works by people of the same era, like T.S. Eliot and Albert Camus, and there was a question about who came up with the idea first, who inspired the other person. So there'll be some more of that this week. So there's a few quotations where he really goes further on that awareness of his own existence and the world and reality and all those things, and from it come up these big concepts with these big names that were so important apparently in 20th century philosophy. And the question arises whether did Sartre actually originate that. So some of the things that he says, there's at one stage he says the thing which was waiting has sounded the alarm. It has pounced upon me. It is slipping into me. I'm full of it. It's nothing. I am the thing. Existence, liberated, released, surges over me. I exist. So there's this idea of existing. I am. So not. I hadn't really thought of that before. It's almost a kind of a blasphemous recapitulation of what God says. God says, I am. So now Sartre is saying, I am because I am, I suppose. I exist. There's nothing else apart from that, but that is everything. My existence is there. There's no. He goes on to say there's no past. Like before, we talked before about how he'd had that experience of seeing a woman walking down the street. Then she went round the corner. She was no longer there. Had she ever been there? Is there ever any past? Is there ever any future? So he and Camus would say there is no future for us as individuals. There's nothing after we leave this world. So doubting whether there's a past, whether there's a future, there's just this moment, and at this moment I am, I exist, and that's all there is. But to realise that he exists is something that liberates him in a way and surges over him. But at the same time, he goes on later to say that there's something horrible about that. So there is this existence, but it's horrible and disgusting. He sees other people around him, and they apparently exist too. They're alive at this moment, they're real, and they're just as much as he, so he doesn't doubt that. But there's too much of them. So we mentioned last week about his disgust and contempt for the bourgeoisie people he sees parading down the street on Sunday morning, enjoying their success and their well-dressed appearance, and he finds that repulsive. But not only them, everybody around him exists, and their existence is too much, it's superfluous, it's gross and undesirable, it's just getting in his way. He doesn't want to even to conceive of it. There's a kind of, he says there's an undesirable and unnecessary insistence on being. So on the one hand, he says, well, I do exist, there's nothing else apart from that, and other people do, but that is unnecessary. They shouldn't even do that, perhaps. There's a superfluity in it all. And then this other big word comes out. He says, because of the gross undesirability and lack of necessity for their existence, and nevertheless their insistence on existing and being, they become absurd. And then another point he says, using a capital A for the word absurdity is now born beneath my pen. Without a clear formulation, I have found the key to existence. So there's the two big things we've been talking about for a while when we're looking at Camus: existentialism, absurdity, the absurd with a capital A. So was Sartre actually the one that first came up with those? I'm not sure really. I haven't read enough of other people's works to know, but he seems to be claiming to be the initiator of those ideas. So he says he exists, other people exist now. They won't. They haven't. There's never been a past. They won't exist in the future. They exist now. But even that existence is kind of disgusting and repellent and absurd in itself. And then he says, I exist, others exist because of a contingency. So there's been something has happened to make that come about. There's a contingency, but that doesn't imply a cause. In other words, there's no creator. So I guess that's kind of a scientific view, that a series of events, a series of chemical reactions and developments from those led to ultimately to a human being existing. So there's a contingency but not a cause. So again, there's no God, he says, but we just have come about anyway. And maybe that wasn't a good thing. It's absurd and disgusting, but we have it now and we want to cling to it. And as Albert Camus was talking about in some of his books, in This Stranger and other things, we don't want to let go of it now that we've got it. At the same time, he doesn't really have much time or respect for science itself. So he says, we've already mentioned in the last episode about the autodidact, the person who has decided to educate himself by reading every book in the library, going through in alphabetical order of the authors. And the main character of the novel Nausea has a sort of a contempt, but at the same time a kind of liking for that character. But the whole idea of scientific knowledge and even knowledge in general, so he makes the comment at one stage, he will laugh at them. What have you done with your science? What have you done with your humanism? Where is your dignity as thinking reed? So that's actually an attack on Pascal, the French scientist and philosopher. So Pascal was really one of the first real scientists, I suppose, like people in the 17th and 18th centuries started to actually to come to an understanding of what happens in the world by the scientific method. So as opposed to the Greek philosophers, the 4th century BC and the 5th century BC, they were really just conjecturing really and giving their opinion about things. But when science started with people like Pascal and Newton and other people, they actually looked at phenomena in the world and formed theories about them and then conducted trials to see whether they supported the theory or not. And that's how they came to understand what really is going on rather than just giving their opinion about what's going on. So Pascal was in that world. I mean, his name is given to the measurement of pressure that we have now. So he was really looking into that, but he was also quite a devout Christian. His book Pensées is one of it's quite a short book, but well respected in both the kind of, I suppose, theological and philosophical worlds. Anyway, but he described man as a thinking reed. What is man? But he's a reed. So he's fragile. He's fades away quickly, but nevertheless he's thinking. Anyway, so Sartre is referencing that when he talks about the thinking reed. And so he's dismissing that as something, as a useless exercise, really. And then also, a bit later on, he says, fools describe existing things as struggling to survive. So again, that's presumably a reference to Darwin and to Haeckel, the German evolutionary scientist. I've actually written a chapter about him in my book, Best of Times, Worst of Times. So Haeckel was kind of not really a follower of Darwin, but moving along the same lines. So, and Darwin particularly is one of the foundations of, I suppose, the modern humanist, atheist, philosophical worldview. But the Sartre character in this book is kind of describing them as fools, really. Fools describe existing things as struggling to survive, struggling, thrusting upwards and seeking. In fact, Sartre says they're not doing that, they're just falling, they're weak and exhausted and failing. So he seems to have a somewhat jaded view of all of those things, really. So then, what does he really want? I mean, he's in this position where he exists, he knows that's fleeting. He doesn't want to lose that. But he even begrudges other people their right to exist, even if it's only for a moment. So would it be better just to be in a state of nothingness? One wouldn't have to exist. One wouldn't have to see the limitations of one's existence, whether the end point to it. Just nothingness altogether would be perhaps like a nirvana kind of idea. But then he goes on to say, well, nothingness is unattainable because even to see or conceive or understand nothingness, one has to exist to be in a position where one can contemplate nothingness. And by existing and contemplating it, one has then made nothingness non-existent by. We're existing to see nothingness, therefore there isn't nothingness. So he's in a bit of a dilemma, but then he says, well, most of the human race are happy in their ignorance. They don't see things the way Sartre, or the character in the novel, sees things. So he kind of almost regrets that he can't share the ignorance of the rest of the human race, but he's fated to be one of the few people that really see what's happening and suffer because of it. So what actually happens in the novel as a novel? I mentioned in the last episode that I was going to talk about what becomes of the autodidact character. So he's caught out in some sort of paedophilia offence, and because of that he's banned from the library, so he will never be able to complete his project of reading every book there. The main character himself has got to this point where he really doesn't know what to do with existence, or the lack of existence, or the possibility of nothingness, or whether even that is unattainable. So anyway, ultimately he gives up work on the historical book that he's been writing. He leaves the town where he's been, goes back to Paris, tries to rekindle an old love affair. That turns out to be hopeless. He gets some sort of encouragement from a story about a dead negress singer and a Jewish songwriter. He finds something positive in all of that, but he thinks about maybe writing a different kind of book, and maybe that will lead to something positive. So, and that's where the story ends, really.